Destiny of an Emperor and Dragon Quest are very different takes on the RPG genre. One is a fairly basic RPG that has several archaic gameplay mechanics, and the other is a pretty unique game that doesn't really, compare too well with other RPGs, but there are still some similarities between them. I think the biggest similarity between the two is really the graphics. It kind of made me wonder if Capcom had licensed one of the Dragon Quest engines for it and used a similar graphic style. At least that's the way it looks like when I look at the pixel art in both games. There are a few other similarities besides the graphics, but that's really the big one. Most of them are just general gameplay mechanics, and those are tropes that you're going to see in pretty much every RPG from this era. The stories and the battles are fairly different. Destiny of an Emperor has a huge pool of playable characters, as opposed to Dragon Quest, which just has a solo protagonist. Anyway, let's get into the games and see what's going on with them. Both of these games are turn-based RPGs where you go on a quest in order to make things right. I know this is an extremely vague description of them, but that's really what most of these video games have in common when you really boil the story down. They also have similar graphics, so yeah, that's kind of fun. In Dragon Quest, you play as a descendant of a legendary hero, and you have to go on a quest to save a princess, gather items, and eventually defeat the Dragon Lord. I kind of like the game's story. It's pretty simple, but it does get the job done. But the gameplay is really rather archaic, especially when you compare it to just its contemporaries. You can see how far the RPG genre moved in just a few years. Destiny of an Emperor's plot is based on historical events. It's more of an alternate history of those events, but it is based on those. Specifically, the Three Kingdoms era of Chinese history, where you have Liu Bei, who is portraying the hero in all of this, and he is going to unite the country under his rule. The game largely follows a linear path. There are a few quests that take you off in different directions, and there is a lot of backtracking in this game. I can really only think of a handful of side quests, and I think everything in this game is required in order to beat it, so you really have to do everything in this in order to get to the end of the game. There are a lot of differences between the gameplay in these two games. At the core of both of them, they're turn-based RPGs, but they are very, very different. Especially when you just look at the basics, where Dragon Quest you have one protagonist, and in Destiny of an Emperor, you form a party of 7 characters. One of them has to be your tactician, and another one is just in reserve. So, you've got that, and then you also have a pool of just hundreds of other characters that you can put into your party, even if there are 5 main ones. So, yeah, it's going to be fun when I go into the main differences in just a second. So let's go ahead and go into that. There are 3 big differences between these games, and then a bunch of smaller ones that I'll end up talking about as well. For the most part, I'm going to be talking about the setting, the story, and also the combat systems, because they're all pretty different. Dragon Quest is a high fantasy game, while Destiny of an Emperor is either historical fiction or alternate history, depending on what you want to label the game. Its setting takes place in ancient China, where you are trying to, unify all the different warring parties of China under, Liu Bei's rule. Dragon Quest, you're just trying to defeat the Dragon Lord. So yeah, it's pretty different. You're using magic in that game. You're, just one person against the world, whereas in Destiny of an Emperor, you're using military tactics, and you've got just armies of thousands of soldiers as the game goes on. You also have more generals that you can recruit to your side, and there's a much bigger narrative going on. The plots really are quite different when you actually look at them. A lot of that has to do with Dragon Quest being a fairly early RPG where its plot is very simple. It's not a bad plot, but there's just not a whole lot going on. With Destiny of an Emperor, the story is much more complex and seems to really want to keep things going, because you are going to come to what feels like a natural conclusion several times, where you beat one warlord, it seems like peace is restored, but then another warlord rises up and you have to go fight them. It can be a little, not really sure what the word is. I guess frustrating is the best way I can put it. It is a fun story, though, because it does at least follow historical events in some ways, but the outcomes of those events are pretty different from what really happened. So the combat systems are pretty different as well. Dragon Quest uses a first-person perspective for its combat screen. It has magic, and you're really only fighting one enemy at a time. This is a text-heavy game, and while there are some graphics for the hits, being hit, that sort of thing, and also being close to death, most of what happens is really being done just with a text box at the bottom of the screen. Destiny of an Emperor shows your party on the left-hand side of the screen, and the enemies are on the right. It's a little different from the way you would see in, like, Final Fantasy or other turn-based RPGs. It's a different way of looking at the battle, but it's not bad, it's just kind of odd, and it stands out a little bit. It's actually a rather boring combat screen, because it is just black with a text box. You see some very minor graphical hits, but that's really all you get. When you do use a tactic on the screen, nothing really happens. It just looks like you hit your opponent, the same animation happens, and you're just watching the number of soldiers for each unit in the army go down. It's not the most exciting one. So, yeah, if I had to do anything, like with a point system here, I would give the point to Dragon Quest for its combat scenes, just because you're seeing a much larger picture of an enemy, as opposed to what looks like a random NPC. I do want to circle back to just the magic system really quick. I think the biggest difference between those two, aside from the fact that Dragon Quest has your one character kind of do everything, they have a much better way of doing their magic. Destiny of an Emperor does something similar where you're going to be gaining spells over time, but those spells are pretty hard to identify as to what they actually are unless you have the manual with you or you're looking it up online while you're playing. If you were like me and you just downloaded a ROM back in the mid-90s and were playing this, you wouldn't know what most of those things were until you actually used them in battle, and then tried to remember what they were or wrote down what they were. The problem is, well, you can kind of chuckle at some of Dragon Quest's spell names, like Hurt and Hurt More. It's kind of frustrating when they just took the translated text, or didn't take the translated text, just took the text in Japanese and then Romanized it. So you have what someone's interpretation of that Japanese text said, and it's not translated into English. It's just using, Latin letters. It's really fucking annoying, to be honest with you. Let's go into what each game does better now, because I'm just want to move on. There isn't too much that Dragon Quest does better than Destiny of an Emperor. While I do like the game, and it serves as a historical marker to illustrate how far the genre has come, it doesn't mean that it's entirely bad, and it doesn't mean that, the game itself has nothing to offer. It's just a very dated way of making an RPG. The one thing that I can point to that is clearly better than Destiny of an Emperor would be the graphics on the battle scene. Destiny of an Emperor's just kind of boring, whereas Dragon Quest, their enemies look very good. It's a very bright and colorful game. The screen looks pretty good, especially when you look at the enemies. They're fairly large sprites, they're well detailed. They just look a lot better than, just the standard NPCs that you would see in Destiny of an Emperor, where they just reused those sprites on the combat scene. The other parts of Dragon Quest are either as good as what you would find in Destiny of an Emperor, or worse than that game. There is a charm to Dragon Quest that I think makes it a little fun to go back and play, and playing this game does make me appreciate how far the genre came in just a short time. Aside from that, no, I don't think there's really anything else that I can say that I haven't already said about this game. Destiny of an Emperor is able to stand out because of its setting and really the rejection of fantasy elements that you would find in other RPGs. It also has some pretty unique gameplay mechanics that you're not really going to find in other NES games. Capcom did do a wonderful job of making something that was able to really stand out from a fairly crowded field, and a field that would get a lot more crowded as the years would go on. Right off the bat, Destiny of an Emperor reduced the number of actions on your menu screen. It's closer to what you would see in Phantasy Star when they made their little menu, and it's got a decent inventory system, even though it is a little annoying to kind of navigate, but you could say that about quite a few RPGs from this era. The combat mechanics and the party system are also much better than what Dragon Quest was. I love having a party of 5 characters, going on a long quest to find all the members of your party, and also recruiting enemy generals to your side so you don't have to deal with them later. This is a mechanic that I really enjoyed when I went through this game, and it's not like any other RPG you're going to find on the NES. The story also stood out to me. It's more of a grand quest to unify China, and it takes a while to really do that. Rather than your standard, you need to go defeat the evil guy who's either going to do something evil or planning on doing something evil. This is just something that's very different from the other RPG plots from that time. I could really keep going, but that's sort of the major things that Destiny of an Emperor does better. At the end of the day, I simply just enjoy this game more than Dragon Quest. I don't think there's going to be much of a surprise here. I think Destiny of an Emperor is a more complete game and a better game than Dragon Quest. It's also a unique take on the RPG genre, and I have way more fun with it than I do with the first Dragon Quest. I also enjoy the approach the developer took when you're, recruiting enemy generals to your side so you don't have to fight them later on, or continuously fight them throughout the game. While the graphics on the battle scene are not as good, I do like RPGs that have a party system in them more than just having a solo protagonist. And it's also more fun to go on a quest to find all of your party members, or convince them to join your side, or, do something to recruit them. That is more interesting to me than just, here's your character, go out and complete this fairly generic quest that you have to complete. The story is also more interesting to me. Destiny of an Emperor takes place during a period of history that I just find incredibly interesting. It is a fictional account, but it's a story that I love overall. Now that I know more about the source material for this game, because it is a fictional interpretation of a largely fictional interpretation of historical events, so yeah, that's kind of cool. It kind of makes me want to go and check out the manga that this game was based off of. There are also some very cool just auto battle features in Destiny of an Emperor. It kind of lets you speed through some of the random battles that you have to go through. And there are a lot of random battles. Like, the random encounter rate on this is very high. So having that option to just, blow through 5 mobs that you're never going to have to really deal with or put too much strategy into is kind of fun. At the end of the day, the first Dragon Quest it's just a very archaic game, and Destiny of an Emperor is a different take when you compare it to the other RPGs on the NES and also on the Master System. I like everything about this game's gameplay. The graphics are nice to look at in most cases. When I go back to play a retro RPG, I look for something a little bit different because I'm kind of a fan of just weird games that don't play like other games. And that is really one of the biggest reasons that I think Destiny of an Emperor is better than Dragon Quest. I don't think this is a surprise, but I would rather play Destiny of an Emperor than Dragon Quest. I absolutely love this game and just how different it is, and I also really love the story and the setting. I found, this game when I was looking for ROMs way back in, I want to say middle school, and I found it when I was homesick from school, played it for a very long time, and then eventually just spent so many weekends trying to find this game in my area once I, went out and started collecting retro games. So I've got a lot of nostalgia for this. It's a really fun game to go through and play. Back then, it was like finding a hidden gem in the NES library, especially since, I wasn't online back in the 90s, didn't know too much about all the games that were actually on the NES, and was just looking for random stuff. Finding this was so much fun, because I had never heard of it before, none of my friends knew anything about it, except for the one jackass who said that he knew everything about it, because of course you have that one friend who knows everything, according to themselves. But aside from that, nobody else really knew anything. So finding this game, playing it online for a very long time, then eventually going out and trying to find a copy of it, it was just, one of those things that adds to the story of somebody's personal experiences with a game. And that's kind of why I like going back to it. It's different from really any of the other RPGs that I played, and that's part of the reason that I would rather play this than Dragon Quest. That and its gameplay is just much better than the first Dragon Quest. I had a whole lot of other stuff written down that I'm just going to kind of skip over in an effort to not repeat myself. I do like both of these games. I even like the first Dragon Quest for just being what it is, and going back and seeing it and using that as kind of a measuring stick to show how far other RPGs have come in even just a short amount of time. Even in the late 80s and the early 90s, you can see how not only Enix, but Square, Capcom, Sega, they all took that genre and vastly improved on it. I still find, Destiny of an Emperor to be a really fun game to go back and play. It is a very grind-heavy game, but I just find that to be pretty relaxing. It's one of the games that I really love. I fell in love with it way back in the 90s, and I still enjoy playing it now. That's really going to wrap things up, but let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.